I said I connected with Fritz Maytag just recently. I said, yeah, because he's been out of the industry now for a number of years, and I said, boy, the industry is just crazy now. And he said, well, you got me and you to blame for that. So he's right that we did sort of change the dynamic of beer in America.
Welcome back, everyone, to a very special episode of the Tales, Ales, and Trails podcast. We're not doing a Sunday Sips episode for you. This is going to be something new, exciting, just an interview-style podcast where we interview creators in the industry of beer and hopefully other things as we begin to really explore our possibilities. And our first one is to do with one of our favorite people.
I mean, this is as big as it gets, and I can't tell you how excited we were to be able to sit down and talk with this gentleman. This idea of trying to get more into the storytelling side of craft spirits, craft beer, and craft drinks in general, it was really enticing to me, particular, and Kyle as well. The opportunity to go behind the drink and talk about the people and the stories that made all of these things possible. And what better brewery to start with, and what better individual to start with than Ken Grossman of Sierra Nevada.
The guy himself.
We're so lucky, a ton of people to thank for making this happen, but we got the opportunity to sit down with Ken Grossman, really one of the founding fathers of craft beer, sure. By pretty much every single measure you can think of. It was a fantastic discussion. We're so excited for you guys to be able to get to see it. Before we, transition over into the interview itself, we got to say thank you to Gary Smith. Huge part of making this happen. Absolutely. Ben Mota, All Access Designs, helping us edit this, being there the day of the shoot, really engineering the way this podcast looks and sounds. And I'm still over the moon. I still can't believe we got to sit and talk to this guy.
He's incredible.
He's everything everyone tells you that he is, kind, incredibly thoughtful with the way he speaks, and just a fun guy to talk to.
Enjoy it, guys.
Well, Ken, thanks for being here, first and foremost.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Right off the bat, I kind of just want to ask, how are you? How are things? Take us through, what's going on with Ken Grossman.
Things are overall pretty good. It's been a rough few years for us and the brewery and the brewing industry. Actually, has been a bit challenged the last couple of years. And then we've dealt with park fire here locally, which all caused quite a bit of local damage. And then we had a big hurricane out in North Carolina, so our brewery out there got impacted by Hurricane Helene as well. So we're sort of living through those, and then now dealing with potential tariffs, which might impact beer cans, bottle caps, malted barley out of Canada. So we're just we're working through what that means and what's going to happen there. So at this point, still up in the air, but overall, we're doing well. We've been, I said the whole beer industry, craft brewing as well as beer, wine, spirits, all the alcoholic beverages, have had a pretty rough go the last few years. COVID was sort of a shot in the arm for some, and then after that, the market seems to have slowed way down, and people are drinking a little bit less, and so there's been some challenges overall.
You talk about the industry and everything that's going on with the industry right now, and I think it's a good segue to at least talk for a moment about where the industry was when Sierra Nevada first started, because it's a vastly different landscape.
Yep.
And a lot of challenges facing you along the way as you really tried to, get your footing with the brewery. I was reading through Beyond the Pale and the amount of barriers that you had to face. I mean, I was thinking about the bottling line that you bought that had so many different things that you had to retrofit to make it work. Was there a moment for you where you're like, I don't know if this is gonna work? I mean, can you talk about maybe the challenges that you faced in those early days?
Sure. I mean, the industry was dramatically different than it is today. When I started, in the late 70s, I was a home brewer, going back to actually the late 60s. I started home brewing and then moved to Chico in 72 and ended up opening a homebrew supply store in 76. And at that point, that was about the low point of the U.S. Brewing industry as far as the number of brewers that were still operating. And breweries were closing at a pretty rapid rate, and most, if not all, those breweries were really sort of the legacy small brewers that somehow survived Prohibition, whether they made soft drinks or soda, or they were bootlegging, or however they survived that period when they couldn't legally sell, and then opened back up. And there was over 1,000 breweries that opened back up after Prohibition, but they were rapidly going out of business in the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. To a point when we started, there was only, I think, less than 40 breweries in America total, and that's Anheuser-Busch, Miller, Coors, everybody, including all the small brewers.
Yeah.
And so for us, in 1977, the first sort of craft brewery opened up New Albion, and then a few of us followed, all pretty much home brewers. As far as our experience, there was one guy who went to UC Davis, but the rest of us were hobbyist brewers, and it was a real struggle. I mean, there was no craft beer, there was no internet, so communication and awareness was, significantly slower to travel, and so we relied on, basically walking the streets, visiting bars, restaurants, hand selling our beer, going to, what were beginning beer festivals. There were some small festivals to celebrate beer and brewing that were just starting to happen in the late 70s, early 80s. But it was a huge education. We got to educate the consumer, we had to educate a retailer to convince them to sell our beer. And then when we got big enough, we had to get a wholesaler in the middle to hopefully represent us throughout geographies we couldn't directly deliver to.
Yeah.
So it was a real struggle. And
Yeah.
there were 6 of us that opened up in those first 4 years. I think 3 of them went out of business within the first year or 2, and we're actually the last one of that first wave of small breweries that's still in business.
Yeah. It's interesting. You were talking about walking the streets. I think you guys weren't even selling them by the case at that point,
No.
right? It was trying to get single bottles into...
We couldn't afford 6-pack carriers, to be truthful. We had spent nearly $100,000 to build the brewery, to buy ingredients, to fabricate equipment, and I initially had a budget of about $50,000, and we had to keep going back to family and friends and trying to find a few dollars here and there to get the doors open finally. So we really didn't have any money for things like 6-packs.
Sure.
And so selling individual bottles, that was a hard sell.
Right.
Somebody had to buy a case, or a liquor store would just put singles on the shelf. That's how we started our first couple of years. No draft beer. There were so few specialty draft accounts in the country. There were some Irish bars that would maybe have Guinness or some other European draft beer, but in general, it was Bud, Miller, Coors, or those kinds of brands on tap, and there weren't any real specialty accounts where you could sell draft beer. So we didn't even bother in the beginning.
Yeah, man, such a different world.
Yeah.
So you talk about the going to family and friends for the support, not just financially, but probably emotionally, and just keeping you back, your spirits in it. What did they first think of the endeavor that you were taking on?
They thought it was pretty crazy. My early investors were my father and my grandfather, and then I had a partner at the time and his father, and mother and business partner were also investors on the other side. And they all thought it was novel. I mean, even though it was a lot of money back then, it wasn't a lot of money in the scheme of things. We were, again, thinking we could open up with $50,000 of investment. So anyway, they thought we were a bit nuts, but they were willing to, support this vision and this passion. And we had written a business plan, and in hindsight, it was pretty flawed. But at the time, it seemed like we had, some concept of what we were going to do and how we were going to go to market and how we were going to sell our beer. And it was all very modest. In those days, I think my goal was to get 2,500 barrels of beer a year, which, at least on paper, seemed like enough money to support my partner and I and a couple employees. And we pretty rapidly realized that it wasn't enough money and that we really needed to grow the company or we were going to go out of business. And as I mentioned, 3 of the 6 brewers had gone out of business early on. Both just lack of volume, quality control issues. Most small brewers didn't have a laboratory and didn't have much scientific background. And so there was a lot of not great beer that was coming out of some of those breweries, so they didn't survive very long. And the few of us who made it a couple of years at least had figured out how to do quality brewing and set up a little lab and just continued to reinvest whatever profit we had back into making better beer, investing in more sophisticated instrumentation for our lab, buying better equipment for brewing, better packaging lines, those sorts of things.
As you get things going and you're starting to make a name for yourself, and was there a point or even a moment where you kind of thought, okay, this is going to work, this could be something, we really have something to work off of here, there is a future for Sierra Nevada? Was there a moment for you?
Yeah, there were actually a few of them, and there were a lot of moments where I think you asked early on where it was like, is this going to work?
Right.
And there were several of those where it was like, God, did I make a huge mistake? I've spent every penny I've got to my name. I borrowed money from family and friends. I'm investing in this, cockamamie idea of opening a small brewery. I had never been in the brewing industry. I was a home brewer, but I'd never had worked at a big brewery or sold beer or, dealt with distributors. So there was just a huge amount of learning. So there were plenty of times where I doubted myself in those early years, or just getting even the first batch of beer out. I would say probably a big turning point was when we were in this San Francisco Examiner Sunday weekend magazine issue that they had several color pictures of us and the brewery and a headline, "The Beer That's Making Chico Famous," and that came out in the Chronicle. Or the Examiner, excuse me. And so when that came out, it was like, okay, so we got this huge amount of publicity. We were immediately sold out. We couldn't make enough beer. And at that point, it was like, okay, well, maybe this is going to work. So there were a few of those kinds of moments that happened back in the early 80s.
And that's got to be so validating, like after all the work. I read about, the 12 to 16 hour days and, just the pure amount of effort that went into trying to get this off the ground. When you start to see it actually, the dream, everything you guys have been working towards starting to pay off, it had to be such a good feeling to see, that kind of success.
Yeah, we were not able to borrow money from a bank, so we were having to basically cash flow all of our expansion. So that was really hard, even though we saw that there was some green shoots and the potential for the business to keep growing.
Yeah.
We didn't have an easy way to grow the business.
Yeah.
It was really just one, every time we got a little extra cash, we'd buy another tank or we'd do something, and that would allow us to make a little more beer, and then we'd open up a new market. And then that cycle went on for quite a few years of just sort of hand to mouth funding the business. And we eventually, when we started building here in 87, on 20th Street, we eventually were able to get an SBA loan, and we had enough of a track record that we were able to get the developer who built this initial building. He helped fund it, as well as my partner's mother, and so we finally, I guess, had enough wherewithal where people would at least consider investing money in us that were outside of our family.
We have our podcast generally, we review beers, we find local or non-local brews and rate them on a scale, and we consistently go back to Sierra Nevada as like a
as like our North Star, like our tried and true. We like rank these beers based on what we've tasted from Sierra Nevada. Was there a North Star for you when you got started, or someone you looked up to?
Yeah, there were actually a few, but I've credited Fritz Maytag at the Anchor Brewery. He bought the failing Anchor Brewery, which was an old San Francisco brand. He bought it in 1965, and at that point they weren't bottling or canning either. Obviously, like canning wasn't a thing for craft beer back then, but they weren't bottling even. And so he learned how to make better beer and really educated himself. And then he had some money behind him with the Maytag family. And so he really sort of set the stage for American beer being something that can be as good, if not better, than the best beers in the world. And up until that point, American beer was somewhat viewed a little bit of a joke. If you were an international beer aficionado and you came to the U.S. And you had spent time touring Belgium or Germany or the U.K. or other countries that have a long heritage of distinctive brewing. The beers in America were well brewed, and they were good for what they were, but they were not very interesting, and they didn't have a lot of flavor cues, and making a light American lager is technically very hard, but it doesn't appeal to a lot of the things that a beer aficionado would want, with malt character and hop flavor and balance of bitterness and all the things that we now know of. Craft brewing, IPAs and things like that really changed the dynamic of what beer was in this country. So anyway, Fritz really, I think, set the stage for making great beer, unique beer, distinctive beer that you could justify a higher price, because the small brewers that were struggling and going out of business, what we call legacy small brewers, those were these older companies that had been around for several generations or many generations in some cases. Most of them were following the playbook of the big brewers, and they were making light lagers, sort of nondescript beers, and trying to be competitive with them. And the big brewers had better technology, more money to invest in, better technology for bottle filling, which minimizes oxygen pickup, which then gives you better flavor stability. And so the small brewers were in some cases still using 1940s or 50s vintage technology that really couldn't deliver the same consumer experience of fresh and clean tasting beer. So by following, sort of trying to make those light lager styles and sometimes primitive old breweries, they weren't doing a very good job, and so their beer quality couldn't compete with the big brewers, and so most of them went out of business. The few that sort of carved a different path, and Anchor being the one that sort of led the way. Yingling came out with a little bit more of a flavorful beer, and there were a few others, August Shells in Newell, Minnesota. A few breweries that were trying to follow Fritz's playbook of making flavorful beers, charging a premium so you could survive as a small brewer, and sort of having your own lane rather than just trying to be a light lager brewer.
Right. Yeah. You're talking about it before, about when you guys saw kind of incremental success, you funneled everything you made from that back into the brewery to continue to evolve, to continue to grow. And at least from the outside looking in, I think about kind of some of the pillars that were so vital to the success of the brewery. And one of those pillars, at least from my understanding, feels like innovation. I mean, I feel like that's always been core to what you have wanted to do at the brewery and what the brewery has been able to accomplish. Can you talk about kind of where the passion to continue to innovate came from, and why has that been so important for Sierra Nevada?
Well, I mean, not that we invented pale ale by any means. The pale ales had been brewed in the UK and in some fashion in this country over time. But when we were looking at, what are we going to brew that one can command a bit of a premium price, because we realized we needed to charge a little more. We needed to be distinctive, hopefully something that would appeal to both a beer connoisseur as well as somebody graduating from a light lager drinker. And so we didn't want to make an English IPA. We didn't want to make English Pale Ale. We played around with some of those in our homebrewing days, but we sort of had to pick a path that would be both unique and distinctive, memorable, but also not too off-putting for the average beer drinker. And a Pale Ale back then was 38 bitterness units like it is today, which was a lot for the average American consumer who's used to drinking 8, 10, 12% bitterness unit beers. So our Pale Ale was a bit shocking, but we liked the Cascade hop. We thought it was a very distinctive hop and would not be reminiscent of the UK Pale Ale. So we tried to be creative and really be thoughtful about what would work on the current market and loved it back then. And then as we've evolved over the years, we did a dry hopped our Celebration Ale in 1981. One of the first dry hop beers in the country. Fritz Maytag had been doing that at Liberty Ale and a couple, Foghorn, a couple of the beers. And it was something as homebrewers I was into dry hopping, and having the homebrew shop, I was able to buy unique hops and to play around a lot as a hobbyist. So we started to innovate pretty much right off, and we did Bigfoot barley wine the next year in '82. And then, as we've grown here, the consumer taste has obviously been evolving. When I mentioned, our IPA was a shock to a lot of people. Today there's, very popular beers that have twice that bitterness level that people have gotten to embrace hops and to really, enjoy their role as a beer flavor. So we've had to try to stay, current or stay ahead of the consumer, or at least not too far beyond the consumer as they change tastes and as the whole industry evolves. And we think it's something that's both important for a brewery to both hold tradition, and we do still brew very traditionally, but also to sort of reinterpret styles of beer and flavors and other beverages that are sort of outside of the norm in order to again keep our consumers excited and hopefully delighted.
Yeah. You mentioned beers like Celebration and like Bigfoot. Kind of gave me goosebumps a little bit talking about the origins of those. There are entire communities of people that look forward. They count down the days to when those beers release each year. It's got to be, it's got to be cool to look back on it and say, yeah, we came out with something that was a little different and people really attached to it and they really loved it and they still love it to this day. That's got to be cool to, I would think it would be cool to be able to see that kind of impact that you've had for a lot of these craft beer community members.
Yeah, Celebration is one that I hold dear. I specifically remember buying those hops, the field I went to up in Yakima for dry hopping, the first batch Celebration we made out of 96 cases total. And it was a beer we just loved. And it was so flavorful and so good that it's like, wow, we really nailed it this time. And it's been, with us, from that first year. And I think, as a brewer, and as if you're into cooking and you like to experiment and to try new things and do new things. Making beer is pretty much the same way. It gives you artistic freedom to really experiment. And I'm sure chefs who work in restaurants that don't have menus that change get bored with them. Mm-hmm. And so I think having the ability to sort of exercise your muscles on different tangents of brewing, I think keeps the brewers engaged, and that creative spirit is important in brewing.
The core parts of the brewery. I wanted to talk about the words like right under the lip of the can, the family owned, operated, and argued over. What were the origins of that? How did that come around?
Well, I've got 3 children. 2 of them are involved in the business, and there's been plenty of times where we're having a friendly debate amongst the family as to what we should be doing with whatever, whether it's beer or the business or the building or whatever. And one of my salespeople was like, "Yeah, family owned," argued, and sort of stuck. And so they came up with the tagline after being in a number of meetings where there was friendly family descent going on. So, and so my son moved out to North Carolina in 2012 when we broke ground out there, and my daughter works in the businesses out here in Chico.
Were they always interested? Was it always something that they wanted to do? How did it come about, I guess?
Yeah. No, I don't know that they were always interested. It was something we didn't push them into,
Sure.
my wife and I. If they wanted to be involved, great. But if they didn't, that was fine too. And all three of them did work here during, high school and junior college and college, part-time to support themselves. And my oldest granddaughter just started working here a few months ago as well, so she just turned 18. So we've got the third generation.
I say it's generationally.
Yeah, and we're friends with brewers from around the globe that have family breweries, and some of them are on their 6th and 8th, and we worked with one guy in Germany on a Oktoberfest collaboration, and I think his is 27 generations old, and so there's some really, really long family histories in the brewing business, and it's great to see if you can figure out how to keep it in the family, and there's interest in family members, then great. But it's a lot of work, and it's a very difficult and challenging environment. I mean, it's not an easy business. I've mentioned some of the challenges we have currently, but just the amount of governmental scrutiny we're under, all the license and regulations, the need to keep your quality standards high and to maintain batch after batch, and not hopefully have any beer you got to pull out of the market and do a recall because you weren't paying attention. So it's just you got to be constantly diligent to sort of stay ahead of the game. So it's not an easy business to be in. It. A lot of people say, "Oh God, wouldn't it be great to be a brewer?" And I get a lot of people, thinking it's their passion, but it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of cleaning, and it's a lot of just challenges and navigating the whole distribution, retail. All that is the consumer tends to be a little bit fickle, and they're changing their allegiance to brands, and so it's just an ongoing, you just got to work at it all the time.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I don't know if this is as central as kind of the first two things we talked about, innovation and the family culture around Sierra Nevada, but something that's always stuck out to me is how synonymous Sierra Nevada has been with the outdoors and outdoor recreation. I mean, from the ambassadors you bring on to the initiatives you have, even with Pale Ale and the National Parks Foundation. I mean, it seems like you guys have always really been invested in that space. And I know, obviously, you're a huge, avid outdoorsman. I want to ask personally, where did that come from? What inspired you to be inspired by the outdoors?
Yeah, actually, a great story and a great origin story for me and the brewery. My neighbor, growing up from when I think we moved in the neighborhood when I was 5 or 6 years old. Couple doors down was a very avid adventure person who was a mountain bike, or actually a bike rider, not mountain bikes back then, but a bike rider. He was a mountaineer. He led Sierra Club trips. He was a foodie back in the days when foodies weren't that common, but he was a foodie. And he was a serious winemaker and brewer. And he really was a long-time inspiration for me. One, he would take the neighborhood kids backpacking, so we would get up in the Sierra Nevadas at a young age, and he'd lead trips, and he'd lead bike trips that we would go on as well. But I really got exposed to sort of good food, and then the sights and sounds and smells of him making beer and wine. Nearly every weekend he would be brewing something. And so from the time I was just a very young kid up until my teenage years, I was around people making stuff with their hands, whether it was beer or food.
Right.
And so I think that was part of what got me connected to nature and the outdoors and cycling. I had a neighborhood group of kids that were also very outdoorsy and adventuresome, so we were always on our bikes riding somewhere. And I started working in bike shops when I was in junior high school, assembling bicycles, and then later on working in a little higher end shop repairing them. And then when I moved to Chico in '72, I got a job at the Schwinn shop here, and still did backpacking and mountaineering. And my wife was into that as well. So our first date was on a hiking trip. So it sort of was part of who we were. And our first child was born before I started the brewery, and we named her Sierra after the Sierra Nevada mountains, because we both had a real love for the mountains. So I think it's been with me, again, since I was just a young kid.
Yeah, that's awesome. I got to ask, because the only thing that annoys my wife more than the size of my beer fridge is how many bikes I've got in the garage. Do you have a favorite bike right now? Are you still wrenching around on bikes?
I got a lot of bikes too. My wife gives me grief about my bike. My bike collection. I was a roadie for years, and I'm now more mountain biking. So I've been getting out quite a bit. I've got an Orbea that I like. I've got some Specialized, but no, I like tinkering on bikes, and things have changed a lot since the days when I worked in a bike shop. So I'm having to get used to all the electronics and all the cool new features that they got on bikes. I don't know if you saw the bike coming in. That Paul bike is pretty cool.
It's funny, earlier you were talking about bikes and mountain biking. You stop yourself a little bit. You're like, well, they didn't really have mountain bikes back then. They didn't, but they still found a way to ride them downhill. It's pretty. Looking at the technology today and what they were riding back in the days of Marin, getting started and everything, it's pretty wild to see what people would take down a mountain.
Well, Jeff Lindsay, who's here in town, he started Mountain Goat Cycles, so I was one of his earliest customers for both mountain and road bikes. And I actually just was connecting with Fritz Maytag last weekend, and he had Joe Breeze's fourth bike that was ever made, and he just sold it for $30,000 for this bike that was, I'm sure, very, very primitive compared to what we see today. But the bikes and beer have had a connection for many years.
Intertwined for decades, absolutely. Something that has really stuck out to both of us in terms of Sierra Nevada has been how invested you guys have been in the community for decades. We've even talked about how other local breweries have tried to follow the blueprint of really getting involved in the community and trying to be as much a part of it as they can. And I wanted to ask about that. I mean, it seems like you guys have been there every single time the communities you're involved in need help, with the Paradise Fire, with Hurricane Helene in North Carolina. Can you talk about why that's important to you, why it's important to the brewery, why it's necessary for you guys to be as involved in the community? Because it seems like it's really a part of who you are.
Yeah, I going back to our early years in Chico, the community was supportive from the beginning, and we had a good relationship with the city fathers. When we were getting permitted and building, we always had a pretty positive working relationship, and we feel that the community has supported us, and part of the reason why I think we were able to grow and survive has to do with that connection. And Chico being a college town, a lot of people coming to school here and then going back to the Bay Area or wherever they go back to, they became brand ambassadors, and so that connection with our local community, I think, really just helped strengthen that bond. And the community has been so good to us that we want to return that back to the communities we operate in. And we've got a big employee base here and in North Carolina, and so supporting the community for our employees also is important.
Yeah, this community's changed over the years. Like several other local breweries popped up. I mean, we got Ramble West and Secret Trail and stuff like that. We wanted to get your thoughts on the current state of like the craft beer industry today. You touched on it earlier about the declining sales and stuff like that. Wanted to get your thoughts on it today.
It's a hard and getting harder business to be in. Again, the consumer preference comes and goes over different styles of beer and different brands that they support. But really, in general, beer is very competitive and has always been, but it's very, very competitive right now. Our costs have gone up dramatically, whether it's malted barley, labor, energy, all those things that get inputted into to make a bottle or can of beer has continued to climb at a rate that's much higher than what we can sell the beer for. We can't and recoup all those cost increases. And so having an efficient operation, paying attention to the things that you need to pay attention to, it's pretty critical now, because you can't make too many mistakes, otherwise you're not going to survive. There are more breweries going up for auction these days than I ever can remember. Probably 2 to 5 a week are in trouble, and we get calls from all around the country all the time to, can you partner with us? Can you help us out? So it is a challenging time for brewers. And being a small brewer, your costs are just invariably much higher. You don't get the same economies of scale when you're buying ingredients or cans or bottles or labels or whatever it is. And then just the amount of labor to make a barrel of beer in a 5 or 10 barrel brew house is so much more than Anheuser-Busch or Miller Coors or whoever else is brewing thousands of barrels per batch with one person, where you're brewing 10 barrels with 3 people, because everything's manual, and you got to do a lot of those things that are automated in big breweries. So it is challenging, and I don't know what will happen to brewery down Mulberry Station just closed a couple of weeks ago. One of my old brewers, Roland, ran that. So it's hard, and I see it in our business that it's the margins are very thin, and you really can't charge what you need to in a lot of cases in order to make a good profit these days. So you have to really survive off of thin margins.
Ken, before we wrap up, and obviously you want to be respectful of your time, but I wanted to give the opportunity to kind of reflect on the journey. And I don't know how well you take compliments, but we're about to give you a few. What you've done and what Sierra Nevada has been able to accomplish, it's left such a profound impact on the craft beer industry. Not only locally, nationally, globally. I've found Sierra Nevada Pale Ales in the Caribbean on vacations. It feels like it's had such a profound impact on craft beer. And I guess, what does it mean to you to have been able to accomplish something like this?
Well, it's humbling, and I'll mention that I have gotten some real positive accolades, and we're on display at the Smithsonian. There's a display with Fritz Maytag and myself and a couple of small brewers from the very founding of craft brewing in America. So I was able to take my whole family and grandkids out to the Smithsonian last summer and show them this exhibit. Hopefully it'll be there for a number more years. But so that really was, I guess, a testament that we did make a difference. I said I connected with Fritz Maytag just recently. I said, because he's been out of the industry now for a number of years, and I said, boy, the industry is just crazy now. And he said, well, you got me and you to blame for that. So he's right that we did sort of change the dynamic of beer in America, and it's going through a cycle now, and hopefully there'll be some stability for all the brewers that survive. We went from almost no brewers in America to about 10,000, and it's probably too many, just because it is a tough business. So it'll weed itself out, and hopefully the American craft scene will stay healthy and robust and innovative long into the future. But we're in a bit of a shakeout period right now.
From going door to door selling beers to having a display in the Smithsonian, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. So anyway, it's been quite a ride. I never had envisioned it going the direction it went. And I remember I was interviewed sometime back in the late 80s, and I said if I could only get up to 10,000 barrels of beer a year, that would be just an amazing accomplishment. At that point, I think it'd be enough money that I could have a decent living, and we shot through the 10,000 barrel mark, 86 or 87, and sort of continued to grow, and but it's not been without challenges. So
Yeah, of course.
From everything from the start of, in your words, the crazy idea that you had to start, this entire journey that you've had, what are you most proud of?
Well, my intent when I started a business, and I'd worked for a number of other employers, was to have a good place to come to every day to work. So if I was going to either be the boss or build a company, I wanted to look out for our employees and try to provide a place that was fulfilling and fun and creative. And so I think we've done most of that. Again, we're not perfect by any means, but I think having built a good company, I think is also very important.
Before we let you go, Ken, I mean, is there anything that you want to maybe say to communities, or anything that you want folks listening at home to know? Any exciting things for the future of Sierra Nevada? Anything? I guess the floor is yours to talk about anything you want to.
Well, I think with your podcast, and I do need to listen to a number of them coming up here, but I think just the fact that people are digging into local businesses and showcasing them, I think is great. And the brewing industry is a fun and engaging thing to be involved in, and so I want to commend you guys for taking the effort to putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate that.